Want to drive faster? Listen in as Kinch Rendell, an SCCA National Trophy winner and multi-time Pro Solo champion himself, interviews the best autocrossers in the land. He talks fast and drives even faster. And now here's your host, Kinch Rendell.
Today's show features Mark Madarash. He can be called Mr. ESP, although currently he's in CP. When it comes to solo national championships in ESP, he has 8 of them from 2012 back to 2007. That's 6 in a row, plus 2001 and 1999. 4 pro solo championships in ESP. He's owned this car since 1994, you will hear. Something I got to add that he talks about is he would dyno his car each year just to make sure the engine was okay. And I actually had a dyno scheduled after this interview thinking, hey, I should actually do that. And let me tell you, that is a great idea. I wish I would have done that before I headed to 2 pro solos this year. Being down 10% of power, at least is my excuse for why I did not do so well. But that's just a genius thing to do. Hey, take your car out and dyno it each year. Find out if you're even competitive compared to the other cars like yours in your class. I hope you enjoy it. Mark covers all kinds of interesting topics. We start off this talking about street prepared, because before I said, hey, welcome to the show, I said something to the effect of, hey, we probably should not have been building a FSP car because of what it takes to do that. So we go from there into the normal kind of intro. I hope you enjoy it. Let us know what you think, and if you have any more questions. I don't know much about SP except that we started building a Sprint, and I'm like, wow, we really need to do a lot of things that we have not done. And it takes year after year.
Yeah. Building an SP car, unless you've got a lot of money and a lot of time, it takes years to get it developed. I know I was constantly developing my car when I was in ESP for years. I mean, I probably spent, when I really got serious, I bet I developed it for at least over 10 years, probably. The last few years I had it in ESP, I wasn't doing a lot of development. I would try little things, but it wasn't much more to do. I mean, I pretty much had it locked in how I liked it. I'd try things and never did really work any better, so I just end up going back where I was. There were certain things, that I'd try as new technology came out or this or that. And, shocks, that was one of the big things that I noticed, when they started coming out with some really nice shocks for the cars. They were much better than the Conies that I had. And then the Watts Link, when it came out, stuff like that.
What shocks did you end up going with? And what did you have? What'd you have Coney-wise, and what'd you go to?
I had Coney SSPs. They were specifically valved for my spring rates and stuff. And they were double adjustables. Then I went to AST. And when I first got to ASTs, I just went single because I couldn't afford the doubles. And the main reason I went with them was because I had to run such stupid spring rates in that car because it was a strut car that the Conies weren't totally controlling the spring rates that I was running. And so I went to AST, and they said, oh, yeah, we can do that, no problem. And they were right. I mean, it's about, somewhere around click 8 out of 12, and it was perfect. And then after that, I upgraded a couple of years later to doubles and started playing with the compression after I figured out the rebound and everything, how I liked it. And that's kind of what's still on the car.
Still works even in CP. So first, welcome to the show. Thanks for the time. Tell us when you got started with autocrossing.
My first autocross was in '89. It was kind of a fluke deal. I read an article in, I think it was Hot Rod Magazine about autocross. And I was like, man, it looks like fun. So I looked up SCCA in the phone book in the Yellow Pages, and then I called the number and found out they had a meeting on a Wednesday night at some hotel somewhere. So I'm like, well, I'll go check it out. So I show up to the meeting just to see what it was all about and ask questions and stuff. And I think I was set up personally, now that I think about it, after the fact. But I won a free entry. There was a door prize, supposedly, and I won a free entry into an autocross. Well, of course, I went to that, and after that, I was hooked. That was all I needed. So that's kind of how I got my start. I was in a Fox body Mustang. I had bought it mainly, because I just wanted, back then, the Fox body Mustang was like the fastest production car, almost other than the Grand National, that was really being produced at the time, because in the 80s there wasn't really anything all that quick. And so that was the main reason I bought it. It wasn't the best autocross car, but it was interesting, and you definitely you had to learn how to drive very well, and those cars had a lot of issues.
Is that the ones that had the 5.0?
Yeah, it was a 5.0.
And were they 0-60 around 7 seconds?
I couldn't tell you. Probably. That probably sounds about right.
I think when I was in high school, that was like one of the cars. I remember at the golf course I worked at, the guy had one. He had neon lights under it and some kind of shiny stuff on the side, and it sounded like a motorboat. Blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, those are so cool. I'm pretty sure most of us wanted one of those at one point in our life back then.
Yeah, I actually loved that car. It was a lot of fun. I did have a lot of fun in that car. But, when I got the Trans Am, there was just night and day difference as far as what it could do in autocross. I mean, it was just way better car. And I love this car. The Mustang, I really enjoy. The Trans Am, I think I've enjoyed a lot more.
So what do you credit? Why is the Trans Am that much better of an autocross car? What are some of the differences you can tell us?
I think the biggest thing was not having the 4-link suspension. The Mustang, the problem with those was they had a lot of roll bind in them from the factory, and so as they would roll into the corner, if they rolled too far, they'd start to bind up the rear and they'd come loose on you really unexpectedly. And they didn't put down power near as well as the F-bodies, because the F-bodies have a 3-link, with the torque arm. So that was one thing for sure. And the F-body is just better balanced. It's a whole lot better balanced car. I don't know what the weight distribution between the two of them were, because I never did weigh the Mustang. But this is how I got started with the F-bodies. I had a buddy who had a Formula, and we ran against each other all the time. And we'd pretty much trade off wins, all the time. We ran 2 clubs. And I think I ended up winning one series one year, and he won the other series. But it was like down to thousands. It's like the last event on both of them. And when the big events come up, like tours and divisionals and stuff like that, I'd co-drive with him in his Formula. Well, I'd beat him. And I'd drive the car, and I'm like, man, this car is just too easy to drive. So that's what got me started looking for that body. And I almost bought Gary Thomason's old Camaro, but Tim beat me to the punch on that one. So I had to find a different one. This car, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Did you set it? Yeah, tell us about when you bought it. Did you have to set it up? What was that like?
Yeah, actually, the guy that owned it, I actually had raced against him when I had the Mustang, and then he moved up to Michigan. The guy he bought the car brand new, special ordered it the whole 9 yards. It was his baby. I mean, I think he polished the underside of it. That's how immaculate it was. And I knew that. And one of his buddies had told me that he was looking to sell it because he couldn't drive it when he was up there, because he wouldn't take it out if there was any snow or ice on the ground, or any salt. The only time he drove it was in the summertime when the roads were clear. And so he just needed to sell it. And so I got a hold of him. We decided on a price, and I flew up there. He met me at the airport. I handed him a cashier's check, and I drove it home. And pretty much how it happened. It was a fun trip home, too. I stopped in, I think it was wherever that arch is, at St. Louis, right?
Yep.
Yeah, stopped there that night, and had my girlfriend with me, and we went up to the arch the next day, and then drove back in, drove home the rest of the way the next day. So kind of made it a weekend of it. And it was a fun trip. We had a good time. And I just love that car. It was a great car.
So what year did you get that? What year did you get that car?
I got that in 94.
Wow.
Yeah, I've had it a while. I'm second owner, so it gives you any idea.
Does it have 10,000 miles on it? How many does it have?
It had 40,000 on it when I bought it.
Oh.
Yeah, it was really a low mileage car. this guy, he kept it immaculate. There wasn't, anything wrong with this car. It was really kept up nice. And it had a lot of ESP stuff on it already because he had made it an ESP car. Now, most of that stuff isn't even on the car anymore. I mean, it's been developed from there. But I used a lot of the stuff he put on there for a while just because I didn't have any money. I'm a poor boy. And so I was just having fun. I mean, I used to have a little trailer with tires on the back that had a trailer hitch on the back of the car, and I'd tow it to all the events. Matter of fact, the first year I won a trophy in nationals, I actually had a little tire trailer that I towed up to nationals, and that was my first trophy. Was I think the second year, or I think it was the second year I was in the car, but I actually only finished day one in the car. I was in the trophies at the end of day one. Day two, it broke on my second run, broke the torque arm. And the first one, I hit a cone, so I was out of the trophies. So I borrowed Tim's car, which is Gary Thomas's old car, for my last run, and then pulling myself back into the last trophy spot, which was 8th at the time. And so that was my first trophy, was in 8th place, and I thought that was a shit. Getting home was interesting. I couldn't go in reverse because it was a Herb Adams torque arm, so it decoupled. You could go forward, but you couldn't go reverse because the top link was broken. And it was interesting, needless to say.
Hey, at least you stuck with the car. When I had a Civic that had issues, broke some things, head gasket, I'm like, I don't do this. Gone. Give me another one, please. Like, there's got to be something more reliable. This is a Honda, please. So 94, yeah, you showed it there in 94, it looks like. I'm looking at results. The 95 trophy. I mean, you started killing it. Take us back to, you said you did 2 different series. How much did you autocross at first when you started? How many runs do you think? Did you take schools? What did you do to learn how to autocross?
Well, I went to every event that I could possibly go to when I first started. I mean, there was SCCA and there was Equipropede here in Texas. And they both had their own series of 9 to 10 events a year. So I'm looking at just between those 2 clubs, I was running, probably 19 events. And then I'd also run the divisionals. And like I said, I didn't do national. Well, I did do nationals in the Mustang, but I missed trophying in that car by 1. It was the best I ever did. But anyway, I hit everything I could. I'd say for years I drove both clubs. Now, I don't do that much anymore. I just don't have the time or the money for it. Back then, tires where you buy one set and go the whole year, kind of like street tires are now. It was a double 8Rs with a hot ticket, Yokohama. And, I think 255/16 was about the biggest tire anybody could run back then. And then they started getting, I think, towards the end of the Yokohamas, we were starting to get into some of the 17s and stuff. But it was still like a 275 was the biggest you could get. And you just didn't hear of a 315 or a 335 or any of that stuff. It just wasn't out there. And most of it was 16s and 17s came in next. And that wasn't until probably, the late 90s. So it was fairly reasonable to run. You buy a whole set of tires for, I don't know, $600 and about $600 and run them the whole year.
Oh,
so it was, yeah.
I'm a little jealous because at this point, pro solos, oh man, at least back in the day with Hoosiers on the Integra, you could chew up 2.5 front sets every single pro, every time.
Yeah. And what I'd do is I'd buy a set, right before Nationals, so I had a fresh set of rubber, and I'd run that set all the way into the next year up to Nationals and buy another set. So I'd have a new set for Nationals, but the whole year I just run whatever it was, I got from Nationals. That was my tire budget.
Yeah, and you could use the budget to go to all the events instead. So tell us, you're in CP now. What tires are you running now, and what kind of life are you getting out of them?
I'm running the Hoosier, the 75, what is it, 75 or something like that. It's a compound on it. And actually, the slicks are really, they work pretty good. Hoosiers come a long ways with their compounds. The one thing I noticed about the slick is And I've heard the same thing about the A7 since they've been out. It's like, you know, you can run the tread down a lot farther and still have a very consistent tire. It doesn't seem to fall off like it used to. I wear the rear tires the most. The fronts, it's like I finally just take them off because I'm like, they've got to be dead. You know, but I'm not really seeing or feeling a major fall off on them. I think I've corded only one set of fronts, and that was because I went out to a practice and just ran and finally corded them. But even then, it didn't feel all that bad. You know, I was really surprised. So, but the rears, you can feel those fall off pretty quick with that car. On certain surfaces. If it's concrete, you don't feel it so much. If it's asphalt, you start to feel it. So I go through about 2 to 1 on the rears. The rears wear a little bit quicker, but you know, I'm accelerating and trying to turn, you know, with the rear, so it wears quite a bit more.
What kind of power do you put down that I'm obviously thinking you know they're done because you can't get the power down anymore.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the first things you notice is when you shift gears and it tacks up on you. Well, the tires are probably gone. They shouldn't do that. But like I said, it's usually asphalt. You notice that on concrete, not so much. Every now and then you might notice a little bit. As far as power goes, this is the first year I've actually had a motor with any power. I mean, my ESP motor, if I told you the numbers on it, you'd kind of laugh. Let me give you an example. On the exact same dyno, my ESP motor only put out 290 at the wheels.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Compared to what could have you been putting down, or compared to some of the competition, do you think?
Oh, that's the most I was going to get out of the third gen because there was no other options.
Oh, okay.
I built a Firehawk motor, which was a very rare motor anyway for that particular range of vehicles. Matter of fact, I was the first one to do that. It took me 2 years of research to get all the data and the sheets and everything so that I could withstand a protest if anybody decided to protest me. And it took me 2 years to gather all that data because a lot of those records got burned in the fire. I even called Mr. Hammer himself, which is the guy that basically is in charge of SLP and I think owner, and talked to him, and he talked to me for a little bit. And he just flat told me, he goes, all that stuff was burned in a warehouse fire. He goes, even the engineers have moved on since then. And he gave me a couple of resources to go look at and stuff like that. But it took a long time to get all the specs on it. So that motor, you know, that was probably another 50 horsepower over a L98 motor, and about the same torque. Wasn't a super torquey motor any more so than the L98. The L98 probably had a little bit more torque actually, but this motor would rev a lot higher and definitely produced at least 50 more horsepower. So it wasn't any barn burner by any means. Now my new motor for CP that I built this year, last year's motor didn't last very long. We won't talk about that.
Oops.
But now this motor here, just to give you an example, this one here is about 425 at the wheels on the same dyno. So a little bit of a jump in horsepower compared to the ESP motor.
And can you put it down with these tires, or do you just have to be really gentle with that right foot?
You know, actually it puts it down real well. I don't really, especially at Lincoln, I really haven't noticed any issues too much. I mean, you still have to feed the throttle, but I had to feed the throttle with the other motor too. I mean, it's just educating the right foot. It's really not that big a deal. I think horsepower, you know, if you have a good driving technique, it's not that big of an adjustment. I mean, it was still an adjustment, don't get me wrong. There was still things that I had to adjust to, but it wasn't a huge leap. Like I wasn't spinning the car every time I went out in it or anything like that.
Yeah,
and also
you already had the feel of, okay, I'm rotating with the rear. If you were already doing that, it was just happening at a different point on the power band, I guess.
Yeah, well, this motor has a lot more torque, so it came in a lot earlier. This motor, it puts out like 433 foot-pounds, and it puts over 400 pretty early.
Fun. So you built the motor yourself. What kind of
No,
skills?
actually, no.
Go ahead.
Actually, I had it built.
Okay.
It was my specs. I picked all the parts out, but no, it's an aluminum block Brodix, so I had someone that knew a lot about them because aluminum's funny, and it's got to be machined just the right way. There's a lot of prep work for it. You got to clean all the oil galleries and stuff. There's a ton of prep work, and I was in the shop all the time, watching them, do some of the work and stuff that they did, and there's just a ton of prep work on aluminum block. Now, once it's already prepped, then, rebuild's easy, but the initial prep work and cleanup on an aluminum block, you just don't start putting parts in it. It won't work.
Okay.
There's a lot to it. And not only that, aluminum also, they heat cycled it a couple of times on the engine dyno because they say all that stuff just kind of, aluminum likes to move around and everything after it's been heated and cycled. And so before they even ran it hard, it went through a couple of heat cycles on the engine dyno just running and going through some heat cycles. So pretty interesting stuff, though.
I'm sucking it in. I've convinced myself at this point, after 8 seasons or more in the Civic, that the engine's more than a little tired. I'm like, something's happened. I know I don't have the fresh Bridgestones right now, but wow, I'm not used to being off the pace. So I'm sitting here hoping. I'm like, hopefully I haven't lost skills. So I'm like, but I don't trust myself. I can take an engine apart. But I was thinking, if you built that, what's it really take to do that? I'm just too scared to try that, drive across the country and have it blow up. I'm just not interested in some of that fun.
Rebuilding a motor is not as big a deal as building it from, ground up, initial cleaning block and all that. The block's already been prepped and everything, and it's already run. It's already moved around and done all its moving it's going to do. You're just looking at, you're probably going to go in there and mic it, see if it's out of specs as far as the bore, which more than likely, if it's a high mileage motor, you're going to want to bore at 30 thousandths over. And depending on what class you're in, you're going to have to look at what they allow for that. But usually SP allows for like 40 thousandths over, if I remember right. So you'd probably do 20 or 30 thousandths over, and then, re-ring it, put new bearings in it, and check the tolerances on the crank and stuff, and make sure it doesn't need a crank. And other than that, it's just, odds and ends stuff, on those motors. I wouldn't think you'd need much more than that. Probably look at the valve springs, make sure all the tension on the valve springs are good. You haven't got a spring that's, gotten weak. That probably wouldn't be a bad idea to change out the springs and do a valve on it, And of course, redo your valve guides too, because make sure they're not, sucking oil and stuff like that. But really, it's just normal stuff. It's not anything real spectacular doing a rebuild. But when you're dealing with the, Brodix block, which they cast, and you've got to, clean it up. And plus, this motor here, it's a 400 small block, so they had to cut through the cylinders on the bottom side on one side of the cylinder to make room for the crank to throw through. And so there's a lot of cutting and stuff that they had to do to the block to make all that work, which there's no way you're going to be able to, do that at home.
The Dremel doesn't work for that?
No, you should have seen the Dremel they were using. It was huge, about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and they about wore that thing out. They say Brodix is the hardest liners that they've ever seen. It literally was destroying the tool. That's how hard the cylinder walls were. And Brodix, I've talked to a lot of people, like Lon Vermone, he runs a Brodix box, and he says he goes in there to rebuild it, and he mics the block, and he says the block never wears. He says, you just throw some new rings and maybe some pistons in it if it needs it, and away he goes. Of course, new bearings and stuff too, but he says the block just never seems to wear. He'll just, put a little hone on it, and that's it.
That's nice. That's what I want to hear. That's where. So unfortunately, in ST with the Honda, we can do 10 thousandths over. And I don't know if this engine, Tim Smith wasn't sure if he already did that. And I talked to one shop. He goes, "No, if we can't bore it, we don't want to do it." I'm like, "You can't do any more than that, though." And I even took one shop a block, and they felt it. They go, "I don't know if 10 thousandths is going to do it." I'm like, I know very little about this stuff. I'm like, you just felt it, and you don't think you can do just 10 thousandths? But those machine shops, I guess they know what they know.
What class are you in?
In ST, what is it called? STS now. The Honda only does 10 thousandths over.
Oh, so it has to be within factory specs.
Yes, exactly. And the overbore, I guess the first overbore or whatever is 10 thousandths.
Right.
So.
Well, it also depends on the machine shop. No offense, but I've seen some machine shops, I wouldn't let them machine anything. And not only that, you need to ask them, okay, are you putting a deck plate on this thing when you bore it? If they're not using a deck plate, you need to run quick. You've got to have a deck plate on it. They need to have all the mains bolted up to it. Matter of fact, when they did my block, all the mains were bolted and torqued, deck plated. So basically, especially if it's an aluminum block, everything needs to be bolted together to simulate the motors bolted together, because all that aluminum, when you bolt it together, it all moves. And so you've got to make sure everything's in the place it's going to be in, because what happens is the cylinder walls will actually twist, and so you could end up with an egg-shaped cylinder wall if they bore it without the deck plate or without bolting everything up like it's supposed to be. So there's a lot of structure there that has to be bolted back together before you go in and bore it.
That's fascinating. It makes a lot of sense too, and good questions. I've been trying to call one of the machine shops back for 2 or 3 days in a row. Toward the end of the day, they've not answered. But I might as well ask those questions to begin with. Just find out, hey, do I want to deal with them or not? And then I haven't found the shop yet because I've only talked to one so far. I said, well, I need these exact parts from Honda. I can order them from HPD. He's like, oh, you can't bring us parts. We won't do it. I'm like, well, then you're going to have to make sure you order the exact right parts. I'm just kind of amazed. Like, wait, these will come from Honda in little baggies that say Honda. It's okay. I know what's been superseded. So that's something else I can tell people from what I've already found is some shops, they won't be picky about what they're working with, I guess.
That's another thing. I think I'd run from those guys, because my shop guy, I brought him all the parts. I had him only order what he found that he needed that I didn't get. And he didn't have a problem with it. He didn't have a problem with me buying the parts at all. So I think you need to run from those guys, because you should be able to bring in your own parts and have them, machine the block, and they should be able to mic the block ahead of time and tell you, well, 10,000, clean this up and it work. They should be able to tell you that ahead of time.
Yeah,
if
exactly.
They can't do that. I don't, if they say the block's too wore out, well, okay, the block's too wore out. But if they're, telling you, no, we won't do that, I think I would run.
Yeah, no, good point. I'm tempted just to call Andy Hollis and be like, how much? You probably build 2 or 3 in a day at one point. How much? Just do one for me, please.
Andy just gets them out of the junkyard, man.
Is that why they blow up so often on the dyno? Like, oh, that one blew again, huh? I'm happy I've not blown any. Knocking on wood, not blown any. Yes, all good. So tell us, technical stuff. Left foot or right foot breaker?
I am just a right foot breaker. I have done left foot in like automatics, but with the standard transmission, the pedals just are so close together. There's just too many. It's just not comfortable in that car, and I just don't do it. I don't think it's necessary. I really don't use the brakes that much, to tell you the truth. I'll use it, trailing into a corner. And if it's a really sharp 90, I may brake hard right at the last minute to set the nose and then get it rotated and I'm back on the gas. But really don't use the brakes a whole lot. I don't overheat brakes. I don't have brake fade issues, and I'm only running factory brakes, which on those cars are little bitty things. And I just don't have a lot of issues with brakes. Matter of fact, one of the things I did work on the last couple of years is I went to manual brakes because I didn't like the way the power brakes felt. They were either very aggressive or they were non-existent, because depending on the vacuum of the motor, it would vary, depending on if you bled the booster or not the corner before, and if it got, vacuum back in. Well, if you're on throttle all the time, it may not get enough vacuum back in. So I didn't like the inconsistency of the factory brakes because it just was a little too inconsistent. So that's why I went to manual. And I really like my manual brakes. They don't walk hardly ever. very good feel. I really like the manual brakes in the car now.
So what I can tell everybody is he's saying there's no anti-lock brakes in his car. There's no assist. There's nothing. It's your foot. You're connected.
They never built that car with anti-lock brakes.
Wow. It took me a while to come from the Type R with great anti-lock brakes to the Civic to locking them up. I do left foot brakes. So when you talked about not being consistent, I probably say this in most every podcast, I trail enough or in slaloms where I might touch the brakes a little bit just to make sure I'm steady. I'll get to the end of sections, and this has happened at nationals more than most places, and I have no power assist. And what you're saying, all of a sudden, I think my brakes are broken because the pedal's just stiff. And then I've blown turns because of that, not knowing. I don't think it's legal, but I've wondered, hey, if I just kept any vacuum from her being there, I at least be used to it. Because like you're saying, I have blown runs because all of a sudden the brake pedal is not how it was.
Right. That's why I got away from the power brakes, is because of that one reason. It was inconsistent. Sometimes you had brakes, sometimes you didn't. It didn't bother me probably as much as some people because, like I said, I don't use the brakes a ton. But it was still inconsistent enough that I was like, nah, I'm going to get away from this. I'm going to go to a manual system where it's the same all the time. And it's legal in SP to go to manual. You just have to use a master cylinder that has a front and rear circuit. I think is the only thing the rules basically state. But other than that, it wasn't a big deal. And I didn't actually go to that in SP. I may have the last year I had it there, but I think it wasn't really till I got to CP. I went to the manual stuff. I think I may have the last year in ESP, started playing with the manual. But the first year, I was doing a lot of playing, and they were just so-so. I finally got them right. The next year after that, it actually took me about a year to totally figure out the combination of master cylinder and piston size that worked the best. But now I'm really happy with them.
I want to break down something you said. You would plant the nose in, let's say, a really sharp 90. Take us through, are you saying you would apply the brakes, add a lot of weight there, and as you came off the brake, turn in?
Yeah, I may even, it happens so fast and I'm so used to doing it. Basically, I drive in hard and plant that nose, and as it's planted, I'll start the turn, and as I'm starting the turn, I'm coming off the brake, so the back end's light, and it'll just rotate around, and I've just done it so much in that car that I know exactly how much brake, I need to get it to set the nose, and how long I got to hold the brake, and it all becomes natural. It's like I don't even really think about it. I just do it. And so for me to actually describe it's almost hard because it's so natural to me. I don't even really think about what I'm doing. I just do it.
And that's what makes you guys fast. Once you don't have to think about how I'm going to execute this turn, you've done so many of them, you're just looking ahead probably.
Oh, yeah. And that's really the key. Is, especially for the new people that start this, is if you can't, this is what I always tell everybody, you need to be able to walk the course, and then when you're done walking the course, you need to be able to sit down, close your eyes, and go through the course in your mind. And if you can't pick out all the key cones and key elements, because there's really only probably maybe 15 to 20 key cones on the whole course. All the rest of them are just visual BS. There's only a few that you really are driving around. All the other ones are just there as a guide. But you need to be able to drive in your mind that course. And if you can't pick out the elements in your mind, you don't know the course well enough. And you'll hesitate when you get to that point. So that's one of the things I always do is I make sure I walk enough to where I can sit down afterwards, go through it in my mind, and drive it in my mind. And if I can drive it in my mind, then I know it.
And you're already built in to look ahead. I used to think that, and at times it's still proven out, for me, if I would memorize too much, I'd almost not look ahead. And some people are like, if you get serious about this, you could be fast. I'm like, you don't get it. If I knew walking the course 8 times or memorizing it even more would make me faster, I guarantee you I would do that. So I think it was Chris Dorsey said something to me like, I said, no, Chris, believe me, if I could sit there and do the David Fouth and close my eyes and know every single, like you're saying, 15 or 20, usually I pick out 2 or 3 things that seem odd. I would do it. At times I still challenge myself to try to do that just to see. I'm like, these people are doing something. Can I do that? Because frustratingly enough, I've left nationals on a day where my first run was fastest and faster than everybody. And I'm like, I just want to pull the hair out, just all of it going. So that's where every time you guys say that, I hope people can take something and at least try it and see if that helps them, and not just try it once and maybe try it event after event to see how they can gain something from that. So when you say you're picking out those 15 or 20, you're still, I guess, looking ahead in my mind, not just programming yourself.
Right. Basically, I want to know in my mind what the next element is before I get there so that I can set that corner up before I get to that element. Because, a lot of those corners lead into the elements. And if you the corner radius incorrectly and you're not in the right spot, it can hurt, a particular element. And that's where it's really crucial to make sure you're in the right spot, is to know what's coming up next and make sure you're in that right spot. And if you can do that without even thinking about it, because you know exactly where you're going, I think that's what really helps make you fast, because you're not thinking about it. I know when I first started this sport, the car was ahead of me. I wasn't ahead of the car. And I remember my very first event, I could have swore I DNF'd the course. I don't even know how I got through the course, because it seemed like I was driving so fast that I couldn't even tell you where I went. But somehow I went through the course and I didn't DNF. And I was like, how in the heck did I do that? And, that's the one thing is, if you're driving like that, you're never going to be fast until you can be ahead of the car, thinking about what's coming up next, get the car in the right position. And that's one thing I notice too, is when I get lazy, and I do that at local events sometimes because I've been doing it so long, and some days you just, you're not all there. And I'll go into an element, I'm late, and I'm like, that was stupid. I should have set up for that way back there. I was daydreaming or something, And so there's times where, at local events, you don't really concentrate like you probably should, because it's just a local event, And some days, you kind of wonder why you even bothered going out, because you're not learning anything and you're not testing anything. And so why did you bother?
Yeah. Usually it's an all-day event. When you said the approach of knowing the corners, what came to my mind is, let's say it's a 180. What comes after that is what you would, I guess, set up the exit of the 180 or the sweeper being tight, or let's say a little bit off of it, depending on what's after it. That totally clicked when you said that. And it's something, who was it said? Brian Peters. He said all he focuses on the turns are the exits. All he wants to do is look through the exit. And in my mind, he's saying what you're saying. He wants to know what's after that and make sure he's set up for it by planning for the exit. He said, I don't care about the entries. He goes, I really key in on the exits, because obviously if you get that right because you know what features next, you're nailing it as much as you can.
I agree. I think the exit's the most important. Entry, you can be off a little bit and adjust for it in the middle of the corner if you have to, if your car's set up well. But that exit's the most important thing. It doesn't matter where you enter the corner as long as you get the exit to where you need to be, because that gets you into the next element. You can obviously screw up the entrance if you're way wide and you get into the marbles or something like that, or if you're way too tight that you can't get to your exit because now you're so tight you pushed out and you missed your exit. Obviously, your entry it does matter at that point. But as long as your entry is close to where it needs to be, it's not that big a deal as long as you can get to where you need to be for that exit, and that's the most important, because you need to be on the gas as early as possible. Well, if you've got the exit lined up real early, you can get on the gas earlier.
Yeah, and that's
really.
Have you ever pulled any data or looked at data, you versus yourself or you versus anybody else?
Yeah, I've had data put in my car one time. I don't own any data. Only data I've got to my butt.
All right, Jeff Gordon.
No, I'm serious. I've never felt. I guess it would be nice to have, but I've never. It always seems like I have other things I need to buy first. To me, that I feel is more important, because there's something else that needs to be bought, and I just don't have money, I guess, for the data. But I did have some guys, this one has an ESP, they wanted to stick some data in my car. And it was pretty interesting because they could overlay their runs to my runs. And they wanted to know where I was faster. And they had a lot more horsepower than I did. They were in a 5.0 Mustang. I was in my ESP, car. So a lot more horsepower. And what they found is I was quicker through the corner, but by the time we got to the next corner, they were right with me. And that would go through pretty much the whole course till we got to this one segment with a couple of big sweepers. And I came out of this one sweeper, and I put like 3 or 4 car links on them just coming out of that one sweeper. And I carried that 3 or 4 car links to the rest of the course. So that one corner was where I was beating them.
That's why I can tell you it's amazing looking at data. And that's where my thought there was, like, if you had data, you would know if you broke later than them or broke sooner. What you're saying is you were faster through the sweepers than they were, but their power overcame your ability to corner better than them, it sounds like, until that one corner where they could never make that up.
Correct.
Yeah, that's
exactly what it was.
Data's been interesting. I ran it, realized the tighter line almost always works. And then if you go to a big event like Nationals, you can pretty much, at least I believe, only drive the tight line unless you're like the first class out, because the rubber buildup, especially, it's just amazing. The marbles, you mentioned marbles, made me think of that. You can think, I'm going to set up over here. If everyone else isn't doing it, forget it.
And I always try to run, basically a foot to 2 feet inside of the marble line, I call it. And I don't know if I'm blessed with really good vision. I can seem to pick up where that line is, and I always try to run just inside of it to make sure that I've got room. If the car does slide, that I've got room to slide and still stay out of the marbles, if that makes sense.
Oh, that does.
So
I love that. I love that thought that you're planning a little bit of fudge factor there.
Yeah, because I do slide the car a lot. There's just no doubt about it. It's just how I drive. And so I have to leave a little extra room there, for that little bit of slide, because if I get in the marbles, I'll be going around. I don't want to do that.
You never had a fast go around run, huh?
Actually, no. But
None of us.
I'll tell you a story of going around.
Oh, please go for it.
Back this was 07. This was at Heartland Park. And if anybody ever drove there, they knew about the sand line, I guess we'd call it, that it would build up. It was the sand that was inside of the the asphalt. It was supposedly a road race asphalt. I don't know, it was crap, I thought. But you can ask Andy Hollis about this, too. He ended up the fence that year. Got a little bit wide and got in that sand. And once you hit the sand, it's like being on marbles. I mean, you couldn't control the car if you wanted to. So I'm running against Jorgensen. He's my competition that year, and he beat me all year long. And every event we went to, he ended up beating me. But by the time I got to Nationals, I felt pretty good about what I had, because I'd been slowly resetting the car up for Heartland Park. This was our second year at Heartland Park. First year was a disaster. It was totally different than Forbes. If anybody's driven at Forbes, it was extremely grippy, as much so as Lincoln, maybe more so. And so then we go to Heartland Park, which was probably one of the slickest asphalts, I thought. And then, of course, we ran late in the year, so it's cold, and so now it's even slicker. When it was warm, it wasn't too bad. But when it was cold, it was terrible, I thought. First day, though, first run, right out of the box, we had a really hard 90 to get through the lights. And I got just a little bit wide coming off that start, a little bit too greedy with the throttle, I guess, and I went around right there at the lights. Complete 360. And so I went ahead and bonsai'd the rest of the run, because I'm like, I'm not giving up this run. I want to see what I can get away with. So even though I knew the run was done, I wanted to get heat in the tires, and I wanted to see what I could get away with the car. So I had some data for the next runs, because now I've already put myself in a hole. I've only got 2 runs. And that's not like how I operate. I like to have all 3 runs so I can build on them. And so now I lost 1. So I went ahead and did that run, which actually ended up being a fairly decent run, even with the spin. I was really surprised at the time. And anyway, long story short, by the end of the day, I just wanted to be close to Jorgensen. My goal was to be close enough that I could get him on day 2 if the first day didn't end up well. But luckily, by the end of the day, I was a 10th ahead. So I was very pleased with that. I'd rather be ahead by a 10th than behind by a 10th. So I was real happy with that. And then the next day, it was more my style of course. It was a road race style course, I thought, more sweepers and very fast chicanes and things like that. And I ended up winning by like 1.4, I think, or something like that. Had a really good second day, and that was it.
You're just a show off. Admit it.
Well, I did have a good good day that second day. I think I ended up that year, I would have been second in CP. I was only like 2/10 off of Padberg, if I remember right. I think that was how close I was to Padberg. He won that year.
So you mentioned you like to build on your runs. So take us through 3 runs. What's your thoughts for the first run, second, third?
All right, my first run, I mean, I don't go slow on my first run. I don't feel it out or nothing like that. I charge the course, but I do it at about 90%. I don't want to go 100% because I may miss a braking zone, or I may find a corner that's slick and there's not as much grip there as what I thought was there, or maybe it's tighter than what I thought. Maybe there's an off-camber. There's a whole multitude of factors. So I try to give myself just a little fudge room. So I usually go 90, 95%, on that first run just to kind of feel it out. Also, the tires are cold. You got to get those up to temp. So you're just letting the car run, but at the same time, you're not getting crazy and trying to, win it all in the first run. That'll never happen. If you win it on the first run at Nationals, it rained after the first runs. It's just the way it is. It's not going to happen in the first run. So I just try to get a good, solid first run, something I can build on. Usually, most of the time, I'll drop almost a second between my first and second run because of the tire temps coming up and because now I can go at 100% with the tire temps up. And then on my last run, it varies. I may only drop a 10th or 2. I may drop another half a second. It just depends on the course, and if I've made a mistake on my second run by going 100%, I'm like, okay, I need to back off here just a hair. So usually my second, third runs are pretty close. I could usually stand a lot of times on my second run, but not always. It depends on the competition. So again, it's usually a 3-run deal, but sometimes I can stand on my second run.
Nice. So the third run's just probably a duplication of that. If you notice anything, you probably come back and maybe think through, oh, that was different than I thought, or more or less grip.
Yeah, third run, sometimes you get done with the second run, you got a good run, you got a good time in, and then your third run, it's like, okay, I'm just going to go a tick faster everywhere. And I'm talking like a 10th to half a 10th in every corner. And so if you add that up to all the corners, though, that could be significant. Even a half a 10th a corner, by the time you get done with all your corners, could be a half a second.
Yep. If
there's 10 corners, there's a half a second. So it doesn't have to be, some huge amount that you're going for. You just got to think just a half a second longer, just a split second longer, you're going to go in that much deeper into this corner. Now, obviously, if your second run, you were already at the point of almost too deep, you're not going to go any deeper. But if you could go in just a tick deeper, I mean, we're talking just 1,000, boom, that much more in, you're going to be that much faster.
And are you talking about braking zone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Braking zone. Just a little bit, just a tick long, just wait just a tick longer before you hit the brakes. And now if you already, like I said, if you're already at that threshold where maybe we're a little too deep already, obviously you can't go any deeper. But if your second run, you think just a hair bit more, you could go into in a few corners, you can take that and just that little bit and add it up to all those 10 corners, it could be another half a second.
And that reminds me of something you said earlier about getting on the gas early. That's what, looking at data, we've realized this past year, the people faster in the Porsche, they're getting on the gas sooner. So every time we look at that, it's who can get back on the gas sooner. Another little tidbit I forget to throw in, you said you had set the nose. In this rear-engine car, I've actually realized coming to a slalom, if I'd lift right before the turn, the car would just suck in. It was amazing that in the slalom, I usually have no feel. We actually are trying to make shirts that say numb and number for nationals. That I'm just so happy. I'm like, wow, I lifted, and the weight transfer actually had the front tires bite more. It was nice to at least notice those things.
Yeah. And it's also being familiar with what the car will do for you, too. Every car is going to be different. And some cars, you've got to transfer weight a little differently than others, especially a mid-engine versus a front engine, in a rear-wheel drive. Porsche is going to plant the rear a lot harder than my car because they've got all the weight over the rear tires. But at the same time, you've also got that weight back there, and going through chicanes and slaloms, sometimes they have a tendency to get a little pendulum-y, and they could actually get a little wild on you. So you got to kind of watch that with those cars. So there's every car's got its own little trait that you have to work around. But if you can, know what the car's going to do, you can work around that trait and make it work for you.
That leads me to something I wrote down here to ask you. Do you coach a lot, teach a lot, and therefore have you been in lots of different cars?
I have done a few schools. I wouldn't say I've done a lot. I have done a few with SCCA, and I did that driver's edge or something where you had the Lamborghinis and the Ferraris and stuff, and I did one of those for the weekend, and that was fun, driving the Ferraris and Lamborghinis and stuff. But no, I haven't done a ton. I have done some, but I've had a lot of people that have asked me to drive their cars and give my opinion, and I've had my car break a few times, and I've had to drive other people's cars, and so I've driven a lot of F-bodies and Mustangs and stuff, and they're all different. They've all got their own techniques, and everybody's got their own setup. What was amazing to me is one of the cars I remember the most is there was a guy from Louisiana, and a real nice guy, and he let me drive his Formula because my car broke. It was a divisional, and that was one of the nicest set-up fourth gens I've ever driven, at least on that particular surface that particular day. Now, you could have took it to another surface and it may have totally sucked. But for that surface and for that day, that car was phenomenal. I liked it, I think, better than my car, if that was possible. The car would just do whatever you wanted. It had just a tick of a push, I might have tuned out. But other than that, it did everything perfect. Car was just phenomenal. So every now and then you hop in one and you're like, wow, this is neat.
And it's neat that you can feel the difference and know that. That's where I gather, since you've been in your car so much, your feel and control of that car is probably one reason you're so fast is because you know what's going on. It's just an extension of you.
Oh, yeah. And I've had people drive my car at Nationals. Kenny Baker's driven with me a few times, and he's a really good, solid driver. But I remember one Nationals he drove with me, and he comes back from run one, and he goes, the car's loose. I go, okay, well, let me drive it and see what it feels like. And I went out there on my first run, and I had fastest time. And I'm like, car's fine. And what it was is his driving style was different than mine. And so I drive a loose car, but the way I drive it, it doesn't feel loose. And his braking zone was different, or he was braking too much, and so he was loosening the car up too much. Because, like I said, I don't use the brakes that much. He's a heavier braker than I am, so he was probably braking deeper, and the car was coming loose on him coming into the corner, and he was thinking the car was really loose. For me, I was probably rolling it through the corner more, carrying more speed, and so the car wasn't loose for me. Totally different driving style, same car.
That makes sense in the Civics a lot, and for us, it's do you left foot brake or right foot brake? And if you left foot brake, you don't think any car is really loose. You right foot brake, and I'd wonder if he's also either braking late and or lifting really hard. And that's something I wanted to ask you. Do you use a lift, or is that not really something that you use in your car?
No, I lift.
And what's that do for you when you do that?
I set the nose because I use a very small clutch in the car, so it gets a lot of engine braking. It's like applying the rear brakes whenever I come off the gas, and that helps set the nose right there. But I still have to, depending on the corner, I'm still going to have to trail the brakes. Now, if it's just a chicane or something, you can almost do flat. I can just lift a little off the throttle, and it will point the nose, and I can get right back in the gas. A lot of people can't drive those little clutches. I've talked to some people that actually hate them because they spin the car every time they drive one. Well, one thing you've got to be aware of with those little clutches is when you come off that gas, it's like applying the rear brake. So depending on how you got the car set up, you could have it very loose as soon as you come off the gas, and it could be a monster and end up spinning. So
very interesting. I never knew or thought of that. I realized engine braking would occur, but a smaller clutch makes it happen more. Interesting.
Oh yeah, it totally changes the way as a matter of fact, I had to put a proportion valve in the car with that clutch so I could dial the rear brakes out, because with rear brakes and with engine braking, I'd get brake hop real bad because I'd get too much rear braking, and so I didn't start start axle hopping it real bad. Those cars are bad about that. If you get too much rear brake in them, they'll axle hop. And it's not about the shocks. Some people say, "Oh, you don't have enough dampening in the shocks." No bullshit. The shocks got plenty of dampening in them. It's just that's the nature of those cars because of the way the anti-dive and all that other stuff set up in them.
Fascinating. Yeah, that some people are gonna know this, and other people like me would be like, I had no clue to even consider that could be the issue. And obviously people are telling you it's rebound. You're like, no, really it's not. I've tried that.
Yeah, I mean, the car's got a ton of rebound in it. I mean, it's not rebound in the shocks, trust me. It's not that it has too much or too little. I've gone both directions in my time trying it, and it doesn't matter. It's all about how it pulls on those wheels, and the axle trying to unwind and unwrap it. It literally pulls the axle off the ground. Is what it's doing. It's just bouncing it.
Wow. So what are your thoughts on go ahead.
It can be very violent. Guys have broke, gear sets and things like that with the axle hop. So it's a very violent deal. You don't want to do it.
What are your thoughts on slaloms? How do you attack those? Look at those?
I think the key to a good slalom is your entry. You've got to get your entry right. Once you get into the slalom, then you can attack the slalom. But if you're hot going in and you screw the entry up, now you're behind all the way down the slalom, and you're going to be late on every single cone. You're going to be trying to play catch up. So to me, my entry is the most important. And once I get the entry right, if I'm a little slow, that's okay, because now I can accelerate through the slalom and actually gain speed as I go through until I get to that point where I feel like, okay, I can't go any faster because I'm going to start falling behind. So I usually will enter just maybe a tick slow, make sure I got a good line coming in, and then I will try to accelerate and see if I can pick up speed. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't, and I'll just try to keep picking up speed. If it'll let me keep picking up speed, I'll just keep gradually adding the throttle. Now, the problem is some people, when they say add throttle, they think it needs to be on the floor. No, I'm talking micro movements of the throttle to where you're just, making the motor pull a little bit. It's like idling through a parking lot, You want to go just a little faster, but you don't want to, burn rubber through the parking lot. And that's the key is, not only that, if you give it too much throttle, you transfer too much weight off the nose, and now it won't turn. So you've got to do it very gently as to not pull any weight off the nose, but at the same time give you forward thrust. So it's a real balancing act, and that's where educating that right foot comes in.
That's fantastic. Just as soon as you said, just ease into it so you don't pull too much weight off. That's so key. I hadn't honestly thought through that at all, of that point once again, that if you pull too much weight off of it by accelerating too hard. Plus, it'd be great to look at data. I wonder how much speed you can ever pick up on an equally spaced slalom. Probably less than 5 miles per hour through the whole thing, maybe?
Yeah, it's probably about 5, maybe 10 if it's an opening up type slalom. It depends on if it's a decrease or an increasing slalom. If it's an increasing slalom, you might be able to pick up 10. If it's a balanced slalom where it's equal all the way down, you're looking at maybe 3 to 5. It's not much. Like I said, it depends on how slow you enter in and how below threshold you are of the car, what it can do getting through the slalom. Once you meet that threshold, you're not going to be able to accelerate anymore. You're just turning the wheel and holding the throttle at a steady, you don't want to come on and off of it because you change that weight bias. And that's another thing. If you come off the throttle when you're turning, now what happens? The rear end gets loose. So now you get loose in the slalom because you're whipping the wheel back and forth. So you really got to be gentle with the throttle going to the slalom because it totally changes the attitude of the car.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. I haven't heard anybody say it like that. That's really clicking for me. To just smooth always works, but especially when you have the power you have, you don't want to gun it. That's not going to be a good combination there. So coming in and gradually building that speed up. And what I've realized you're judging every single slalom cone if you're still late apexing or right where you want to be as you go past that cone, and judging can you add more or not add more. Does that kind of
correct?
Make sense? All right. Do you notice that you look at the cone as you approach it and go by it to judge? Where do you think you're looking?
I'm definitely looking to see how far, when I first approach the slalom cone, I'm looking to see where the nose is relative to when I turn in. If the nose starts to get late, getting past that cone, I know that I'm going to probably a tick quick. I may want to back off just a little bit. You can't come off the throttle, though. You've got to just ease back on it, hold your momentum, and let the car scrub speed as you go through the slalom. Because if you come off the throttle all the way, again, you change the weight bias on the back, you could spin it. So the key is to just, on the next one, try to turn in a little earlier and just keep your throttle even. Don't give it any, don't take any, or maybe take a tick away, not much, and just see if you can, get it to turn in where you want it. And if it does, okay, now we're back on pace and we can start maybe trying to add again. It's a real balancing act going through the slalom, and all this is happening so fast that this is where I think familiarity with the car and what it will do really makes a difference. And I think if anybody goes out to practice, one of the things they need to practice the most with their car is slalom, because if you can balance the car through the slalom, you can balance it to a corner, because a corner's got a lot more time for you to react to than the slalom does. I think the slalom is the most important thing to get down, and for me was always the hardest, and that's what I used to always practice the most.
That's great. I like that idea of, and in my mind, I was thinking at first start with a big slalom that's really long so you can do that and then maybe tighten it up and keep doing that to get that practice of, hey, what am I feeling here? What am I noticing? How fast can I get through it? And like you're saying, the balancing, the dancing act there. I like that. That's a good thing to go out there on a test course or a test day to definitely try. You had mentioned earlier, if you're out there not testing something local, what are you trying to get out of your local events? And what are some examples of things you would test?
Usually, when I was back in the day when I was doing all the local events, you can ask anybody. Only if I wasn't underneath the car at a local event, there was something wrong. I was always trying something and learning, because when I first started this sport, I knew nothing about cars and what made them handle. I came from motocross. I knew how to ride a bike fast, but I had no idea what made a car go fast. And so back then when I first started doing this, there was no internet. You grabbed a book, you tried to find a book and read it, see if you could understand what they were trying to tell you. And basically, I would just try stuff, and I knew the basics from what I had read, and so I would try these different changes to see, how it affected the car and what it made the car do. And just off of trying a lot of stuff and getting data in my own brain, okay, I do this, it does that. That's how I learned. I just kind of self-taught myself. And then also I would ride with the faster guys and see how their cars actually handled. And that kind of gave me a baseline of like, this is how a car should work. That was one of the first things I remember was riding with Bruce Dickey and this other guy, I think his name was Robert Roach, in a Corvette. And riding with them and feeling their cars of what they could get away with and how fast they could go through stuff, it's like, okay, this is how a car is supposed to work. And now I need to work on that feeling, though, that I got from riding with them helps me a lot develop my car, because I'm like, okay, I don't have this car feeling like that yet. And so that helped me kind of bridge that gap, I guess you'd say.
Oh yeah, it was something you could learn from. I totally agree with that. Even getting other people in my cars in the past has been like, wow, wow, you can do that? Why did I brake so much there?
Right. And when I first started doing the sport, it was cool because I had two other guys I used to run with real consistently. They both had Mustangs. And ER, which is one of the clubs we run with, at the end of the day, for $1, you could do fun runs. So we would trade off cars with each other and drive each other's cars, because we all had different setups, and just to see what the differences were and stuff. And so that kind of helped too, because we'd ride with each other, see how the other guy drove it, and we'd also kind of get a feel for how their setup was and what it did good and what it didn't do well. And then we'd compare notes and stuff, and then we'd all hook our trailers back up to our cars, and we'd race to Uncle Julio's in town and get fajitas, and it was a great time. That was probably some of the most fun I ever had autocrossing, was the learning part and the camaraderie I had with these other guys. And that's something I miss here, as the years have gone on, and we don't do that so much anymore. I don't really have anybody in my class that I run against. I pretty much run by myself, and I have friends and stuff out there, don't get me wrong, but I don't have that really close camaraderie, I guess, with guys with the same type of cars, where we go out to eat afterwards, or we compare cars and all that good stuff. It's just, I kind of miss that portion of it.
I can tell you, going to the Tour and the Pro in Lincoln this year and then going to the test course, I had more fun because I got people in the car. I drove other cars. It was a blast. I mean, I sucked at the Pro, and yet I did that, and I'm like, it was all worth it. This was a blast to sit there, and even they took the clock down, but we just kept driving and trying things. I'm like, this is what it's about. And it's like, even fun runs. Well, I usually don't stick around to the end anymore, but if I knew there were fun runs, I could get 5 or 6 more runs. That's huge.
Oh yeah. And the club was small enough they could do fun runs at the end of the day. And like I said, they charge you $1. Well, big deal, it's cheaper than what the whole event was, and so we do fun runs till we were just either tired or out of tires, or which we usually weren't out of tires because they were cheap then, so usually just tired and wore out.
Yeah. Oh, so if I took your car away from you and said you have to build some other car, what would it be?
Do I have an unlimited budget?
Yeah, of course. This is fun. We're dreaming. It could happen.
Because that's the biggest thing would be budget for me.
It's gone. No excuse. Start dreaming. You can have a few minutes. I can cut out any blank time.
Man, that's a good one. What would I build? Man, there's a lot of cars or a lot of things I'd like to build out there. I've always really wanted a C5 Corvette and like SSP. I think that would be really a cool car, personally. I've always liked those cars. I've always thought those cars were really cool. That was something I would love to build if I had the money.
They're getting cheaper, too, so keep thinking, but they're getting cheaper.
Yeah, but I can't really think of any other cars that just totally, grab me. That would probably be the car I'd be most interested in, really, is a C5 and SSP. I think that would be a really fun car to drive. I could maybe see go do street mod and something, maybe. I don't know what, though. That would be a fun class if I had unlimited money. I could be doing street mod, because there's all sorts of stuff you can do in that class, too. That's one thing I never did like, is stock class. I started out in stock class I think I drove it for maybe 1 or 2 years at the most at the local level. And I'm like, this is boring me to death. I got to tinker on something. I've got to know what makes this stuff work. Putting tires and shocks on it, and that's it, I'm bored. Okay, we're done. Can't do it. So I went right to street prepared. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I was probably slower than the stock guys. I didn't care. I was having fun. I was able to tinker now. And to me, that is fun, being able to try to make things go faster.
So what brings you back these days and for all these years, even if it's different things?
still love driving this car. Just that and the competition. I've always been very, very competitive. My whole life I've been that way. In sports, my motocross racing, everything. I have to have that outlet of competition. I think without it, I think life would be boring. I have to have that outlet. And don't get me wrong, there's times in the wintertime I don't go anywhere near that car because I've had enough of it. But start January, February, even Christmas time, I'm starting to get a little bit itchy. And I'm starting to think, okay, we need to start getting ready for next year. And, by the time the first race is around, I'm ready to go. Unless it's raining. I don't want to go.
Then you're like, where's my Civic at? Where's my limited all-wheel drive or something with limited slip and skinny tires?
Yeah.
Oh, just rattle off some things you used to be competitive in. You said motocross. What else?
I was actually very good at track, believe it or not. I actually set a record, 100-yard dash for the county I was in. I was also very good at football. I was actually running back. I was very good at that, too. Of course, as you get older, and I didn't grow as much as everybody else, I was always the smallest guy out there, but I was always the fastest. But as guys start getting bigger and bigger, it starts hurting more and more. So I kind of had to find other avenues. That's where the motocross came in. So I started racing motocross instead.
What age?
I also played tennis. I played on a USTA team for a little while, and that was fun. I enjoyed that. I wasn't super good at it, but I'm very competitive. Definitely have a competitive nature. Don't like to lose.
Me neither. I agree. Although I take it as a challenge, and like if it's basketball or whatever, it's like, no, this is a good workout. Autocross is not so much of a workout, but it's still a huge challenge. It's like, can I still get myself? There's no defense here. It's just me. Can I mentally prepare myself?
Right. I just love driving. I really do. I love the speed. And certain courses, you go to and you're like disappointed because it was a really just painful course to drive, and those suck. But then you get on some that's like you come back in and your hand's shaking a little bit, and you're like, oh yeah, that was fun. When you can scare yourself, you're having fun.
You're right. The shaky hand. Oh, when I heard shaky foot, I'm like, what? I've never had shaky foot. I'm like, I'm missing out on something here. I've never had shaky foot yet. Let's think that we can have that. And here's another stock question I ask people. All right, your car is broken, but you can drive anybody's car that's already out there and built. What are you hopping in?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of fun cars out there. I'd like to drive Kiesel's car sometime, too. That would be a fun car, I think. I bet that thing's a handful, but I bet it'd be fun. Forgot his name off the top of my head. I don't know why I'm terrible with names. Andy Hall rides with him. SSP Corvette C5. You probably know him. Come on, help me out here.
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to think. Is it the yellow one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm blanking, too. I'm somewhat horrible with names, but especially under pressure, I guess. See, the competition, I can't handle it. So, yeah, that car does look like fun.
I'd love to drive that car. I think that car would be a hoot. And also, Ron Ramon's car would be fun just because it's just a badass-looking car. I'd love to drive that one, too. I think that would be a fun car to drive. You kind of see where I'm going with this.
Oh, yeah, you're so someday, if I still have a Civic, I'm going to try to squeeze you in there and be like, look at this weird thing. Try this. And you're like, no, that's terrible. That's where I'm so glad Go ahead.
Actually, I drove Andy Hollis's Honda Civic one time.
And what were your thoughts? What do you remember from that?
He had a ton of damping in that thing. I remember one thing, it was very hard to steer, and if you got it going one direction a little too far, it was kind of hard to bring it back. I mean, the steering was extremely heavy. Maybe it's because those things are rack and pinion or something, or you got so much caster in them. I don't know, but
he did have extra caster.
Very, very heavy.
Yeah, he had extra caster with his upper control arms.
Yeah, that may be what it was. And it was interesting. It definitely was fun to drive. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think any car can be fun to drive if it's set up, decent and, has a good momentum, I guess you'd say. Because once you get it up to momentum, you don't need as much power to keep it there. And so you can still have fun with it, especially if it's a flowing course. Now, if it was one of those little courses where you have to be on and off the gas, obviously the Civic wouldn't be any fun because you would never could keep your speed up probably, and it'd be kind of boring. But the course I drove it on was a more open, flowing type course, so the speed was always up there, and the car was always interesting to drive. I was waiting for it to do something different, and it was fun.
That's where you named
what car?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You named all those cars you would drive. And those things still scare me. I'm so glad I'm in a rear-wheel drive car somewhat this year and probably for nationals. But before that, I could never imagine getting in a car like yours just because my right foot is not trained to have no power. It thinks it can just, I can floor it here. Because like you said, so many courses. As I design courses, if I'm in the Civic or since I've driven these cars so long, I'm like, this is going to be boring. It's just either way too wide open or way too many digs.
Yeah. I've always tried when I design courses to make it to where it flows real well. Not so necessarily it's really super wide open, but just flows well, where the constant speed is somewhere between, 40, 45, and 65, just kind of in that speed range where you're just kind of, you're up and down a little bit in speed range, but it's not like a huge up and down. It's more of a constant speed where you're constantly moving, but you're at a good pace. And to me, that's fun because the car's constantly moving, but you got good pace going, and you got a lot of G-forces because of the speed. It just feels more fun than driving at something, slowing down, doing a U-turn, and then driving out.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at that. That reminded me when Jason Frank said, he gave me a tip years ago for designing courses. He said he knows a certain size lot can usually have so many features, and what I'm taking from you is think about the speed you're at for every element that's linking together and make sure it's not too big of a range if you're having to slow down too much and then accelerate back up. That's a great way to kind of look at what you've drawn out or laid out and say, hey, am I really making that a big dig there, or am I staying pretty much at that 40-mile-an-hour range? How open or tight can I do it to reach that goal?
Right. And obviously, a lot's going to have a lot to do with what you can build also. I mean, there's some lots that are so small that you're going to have some digs just because you got to do a turnaround. But, you try to eliminate as many of those as you can and try to keep it to where it's more flowing and open. And every time I've ever built a course, even the little cars have usually liked it because it does flow real well. All the elements connect well into each other. There's not, like something where you got to come back off real hard to, come across to get to, and, just makes it painful. I try to make everything to where it connects real well into each other, all the different elements, and where it just kind of flows. And as long as you have the car in the right place, it's not hard to drive. It makes it actually easy. That makes it hard to drive is, can you drive it fast at pace? That's what makes it hard to drive, not that it doesn't connect well.
That's a good point. That's a challenge you're looking for. And that's why I tell people, when you have those really tight turns where some people want to downshift, which I used to be the big downshifter, you don't usually see that at nationals. You just don't. They don't generally have anything that tight. They have enough space now, especially now, not to do that.
Right.
Yeah, Mark, let me know if there's anybody you want to thank, any sponsors, anything you want to mention. I appreciate the time, all the knowledge bombs you dropped.
Man, I got a lot of people I'd probably like to thank. Some of them aren't even around anymore. Probably one of my biggest mentors, I would say, that helped me a lot, especially when I got to street prepared and started doing well. And I used to love to just sit around, because he's a local guy, Tommy Saunders. And we would just sit around and we would bounce ideas off each other. And he would even, in the later years, he would come up to me and we'd walk course together, and he'd ask me what I thought of certain elements and how I was going to take him. And he'd go, "Yep, that's exactly what I was thinking." And he's like, "I just wanted to bounce it off you because I know you drive a lot like I do." And so we would bounce a lot of ideas off of each other, about, car setup, because he had that BSP Corvette. He's driven all sorts of different cars and won championships in them, and he's got so much knowledge, or had so much knowledge, that the guy was great for bouncing ideas off of. And if anybody can bend a rule but not break it, that was Tommy. He could come up with an excuse for anything and make it work. He was great at it. And, back in the day, he was the one that actually set the rule for the spoilers on the back to being no more than 10 inches. One year in the BSP car, him and Wenzel both built these huge spoilers. They're like 4x8 piece of plywood on the back of the Corvettes. And I don't remember what Tommy made his out of, or Wenzel. I think Wenzel's was wood, and I think Tommy's may have been fiberglass or something. I don't know. But these things were like huge. And they did it just because the rules said you could. It didn't say you couldn't, so they did it. And looked stupid as hell, but it worked. And he actually did some timing with it to see if it was worth it. But the cars produced enough horsepower, and the tire technology, wasn't what it is now. So it actually would drop about a second, he said, on course because of the way it hooked up coming out of the corners, because of all the downforce. So it was pretty interesting, stuff like that he'd come up with. And he always had good ideas, or he'd have, thoughts on certain things. So he's probably one of my biggest mentors. There's a lot of people that, have helped me, that I've gotten ideas off of, me and Sam, we bounce ideas. Sam's got his own ideas for the most part, but I'll bounce ideas off him. And, Brian Peters, that's another guy he impresses me the most because he can take a car and within a year, maybe 2 at the most, have it win in nationals and have it well set up. I drove John Hogan's Mustang, which he helped, dial in with John. And I'd never driven the car before, and I got in it and drove it at the Pro for 4 runs the year my motor blew up last year. And the car was really easy to drive. I mean, it slalomed real well. It was a little pushy in the corners, but he knew that, and that's one of the downfalls he thought, that it had, but he liked the way it slalomed, and it did. It slalomed really, really well. And it was a very easy car to drive fast. So he has a real knack for being able to, set cars up, different cars, not just, one particular style of car. He's really got a good knack. And these aren't just, stock cars either. They only do so much with a stock car. Street prepared, an STS, stuff like that. There's a lot more involved there with springs and shocks and sway bars and ride heights and all the other stuff you run into on those cars. So he really impresses me as far as being able to set a car up and make it work. It's not just his driving. He's also very good at setting cars up, from what I can tell. His cars look like they really work well.
No kidding. I feel the same about him. And lately I've been thinking, I was like, how could I ride with him or have some day where, hey, let's all get together and just drive some cars, like the test course. He drove my Civic, but I would like to ride with him. Like I rode with Sammy. That was cool. Rode with Matthew Braun. I was like, wow, different. That was the more fun than driving the cars, was riding with people and seeing what they were doing, like you mentioned a long time ago. That was just a blast. To see what they were doing, see what their inputs were doing. Huge. I think we can all still learn and maybe pick up something to try by riding with people or having them drive your car, vice versa.
Yeah. It is interesting to see the different driving styles. I've watched some of the guys' videos, and some of the guys are so aggressive, and then you've got other guys that look like they're hardly even working out there, but they're all fast. It's just a different driving style. And there's so many different driving styles. It doesn't matter if it's NASCAR, autocross, whatever. I mean, all drivers have a different driving style. And when you set your car up, you've got to be able to set it up to where it's comfortable for you and it fits your driving style. And that's what everybody that's good that wins nationals is able to do, is set the car up for their driving style. And I think that's the key, is being able to feel what the car's doing and make it do what you want it to do for your driving style. Because sometimes it's harder to adapt the driver than it is to make the car adaptable to you.
Yeah, good point. That's where if you're hopping in with somebody in their car, it may not get along with you because maybe you don't left foot brake or something, or you do apply the brakes differently or left. And that's a good thing. I always tell people when especially they buy somebody else's car, you may not be able to drive it like they could drive it.
Yeah, because they have a totally different driving style, and that car may not work at all with your driving style. And I've run into that before. I've hopped into a few cars. I just hated them. They just didn't do anything well, in my opinion. And, they weren't super fast guys that were driving them either, but, it was just awful. The car never felt comfortable. And, that's going to happen. But then I've hopped in a few guys that really aren't any big names or anyway, but their cars were just spectacular. It's like they had a really good feel for setting them up, I felt. Even if they weren't fast, they had a very good feel for what a car should do. And I was very impressed with them. I've been in a couple of cars in my time that I've hopped into, and I was like, damn, this is nice. So you just don't ever know.
Yeah, until you try them. Like you're saying, you hop in some stuff and find out. And that's where I go back to the one time I was on a test course and rode somebody's Civic. And in a big sweeper, they would lift and it would rotate. And I'm like, I asked him again, it was Patrick Washburn. I'm like, how did you do that? I've never had my car set up like that. Once you know it does it, if you can incorporate that in, great. I was just amazed. Mid-turn, you'd lift and, hey, it's rotating just a little bit. I was blown away. I think I quizzed him this last time. I should be like, can you please just come align my car and see if I like that?
There's a lot of little tricks that guys do, and you just don't ever know what that is. Sometimes they'll share with you, sometimes they won't, because they've come up with this magical widget or setting or whatever that they just don't want to give out. And you can't blame them. They've worked hard to figure it out, and they want to keep that secret for a while. And then after they sell the car, they may tell you what it was or something like that. Yeah,
that's where he's always been pretty open. Plus, they're an EP now. Oh, I can tell you, driving that car in EP, it had power steering. That was a hoot. I'm like, how much can I just write a check for to get one built? Because I've realized I probably don't want to try to figure all that stuff out. Like, that was a hoot. Like Avons and A7s, that's fun. That was good stuff. So, Mark, once again, I thank you for all the time. Any other thoughts, comments, tips?
Yeah, one other thing, for some of these guys out there too, that that are looking to get started, I really do recommend starting in a stock type class, even though I don't like stock cars. I think that's where everybody should kind of begin. Don't jump into street prepared or something like that. You'll be way over your head and you could get frustrated very easily. I would definitely try to start in the stock car. Try to get with some guys that are good with setup. Drive their car, see if you like the way it works. If you do, see if they'll share with some of the setup. Some of these guys will share in stock class, especially because there's not a whole lot you can do with them. And just drive for a couple of years in stock, even if it bores the crap out of you because you want to tinker. And then if you do look at street prepared or something like that, especially when you start getting prepared and modified, a lot of times it's cheaper just to buy a car that's already proven than try to build one, because it is I'm telling you, it's expensive to build a prepared or mod car. These guys that have done it, that are selling them, the price tag may look expensive, but believe me, they got twice that much in that car, plus all the hours of sweat and tears.
So true. So true. And that's where, for me, when I bought even the Civic, it was set up. It had won nationals. I'm like, oh, all right. I did put different shocks. I didn't believe that was a big difference. The car was fast. I was like, I get this. And that's where us playing around in FSP with the Sprint, it's like, oh yeah, we have money into shocks, but not all the other stuff and figuring things out and putting the Mumford link, whatever in the rear. The stuff we know you could do that everybody else eventually to make something fast will do that. It's like, wow.
Right. And that's another thing. Those Mumford links aren't easy to incorporate in, and you got to get all the geometry right. It's not just like putting a Watts in. Watts is a lot easier than a Mumford link. Those things are pretty wild, and so if somebody's actually engineered one into the car, and that's worth a lot of time and money, just that one piece, let alone everything else that's on the car.
Yeah, that reminds me. Dorsey had that in that, I guess, EP-CRX he had. And Kevin Wenzel's like, oh, yeah, we should do that. We should do that for the Sprint. And at some point he thought he had the time to do it, and he's like, oh, maybe not. But it was a major undertaking, like, hey, race a different car and leave that here for a few months.
Yeah, exactly. Those are very, very involved.
And one thing I got to point out just from the interview yesterday with Mark Scroggs, He told me something I hadn't thought about was street class now. Now you have the option of front or rear bar and different tire diameter sizes or wheel size, so thus tires. And he's pointing out how now there's more going on than just stock. Plus now you don't have just Hoosiers. You have all these different tires. And he was like thinking Sam Strano. He's like, he has really helped me set up this Focus ST. I was like, oh yeah, it's not the same as when I was there. You could do a front bar or not the front bar, but now you have the choice. So you can't really tinker very long. But like you said, if you can find out what somebody fast has already done, especially if you get in their car and you like how it feels or you're faster in it, realize that street now probably has a few more things to figure out than back when at least I was doing it.
Oh yeah, it has changed a lot. And not only that, another thing you got to look at now is, all the different tire combinations they've got out there too. And I really personally don't envy the street guys because, my class there's one tire pretty much. I mean, if you're like, let's say we're in street prepared, Hoosier, there's really no other tire in street prepared. Now in prepared, now you've got Avon and Goodyear and Hoosier, so you've got 3 tires to pick from. But only one of them is going to pay you contingency, so that's why I go with Hoosier because I've always gone with them. I like them. I know how to drive them, and they pay tires, so it's a bonus there. So that to me is a no-brainer. But when you get to stock, they've got I don't know how many gazillion different tire brands out there now, and it's like this one's for hot, this one's for cold, this one's for wet. What the hell? It's just ridiculous. So I don't envy the guys with that. And like you said, now they have added that bar where you can change the front or rear. That puts a whole other element in it too. But I think most people in most cars, you probably want a bigger front bar for the most part for what we do. Usually the cars, if you put a bigger rear bar on them, they're going to get too loose unless it's maybe a front-wheel drive, and then I could see maybe putting a rear bar on it or something like that. But I'm sure there's somebody out there, there's an exception to that rule also. But yeah, the stock class isn't what it used to be. You're right. There's a lot more options out there of what you can do and what you can't do. Yeah,
I was just kind of blown. I was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And just to include it here in case somebody hasn't heard the Mark Scroggs interview, he mentioned how the Focus ST has a rear bar that is meant to basically bind up. I forget if that's the correct word. It's notched where once it leans so far, it basically goes infinite spring rate or binds so that the car is snappy on the street. But he said on autocross land, it's terrible. And he said people make these bigger bars and they throw them on there and it gets even worse. He goes, so that's actually the opposite of what you want to do. I'd never heard of that they would actually notch it to do that. So that was something that, hey, if you went to buy one, you thought, I need a bigger bar because somebody said so. Oops.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, all cars have their little quirks about them, and you got to know what those quirks are. And that's what I always did when I was trying to develop my ESP cars. I'd pick out what the car did the worst, and I would try to fix that first. And then I would go, okay, what's next on the list? And that's how I would basically develop. I didn't try to fix multiple things at one time unless, this one thing could fix multiple things at one time. But I would try to, fix the things that the car had the worst habits. I'd try to fix those first and then work my way down the list. So by the time I got done, the habits that it had were very minute, if any. You know what I mean? You just fix the worst ones first and go from there.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. That's good advice once again. That's great.
Some people try to fix too many things at one time. They'll make a front bar adjustment, a tire pressure adjustment, a shock adjustment all at once. And they don't know what the hell with a car you go out and drive it. Yeah, it's totally different, but they're not sure what did what.
And that's where Ron Williams pointed out, he goes, I never make adjustments after the first run because my tires weren't warm. I was like, oh, that's okay. That's why I probably never make adjustments, but that's a good point that if it's not really warm out there or your tires aren't up to temp yet, it may be totally different the second run.
You're right, and he's right. Now, there is sometimes, well, I'll give you an example. At the Texas Tour, my first run, first day, I made an adjustment after the first run because the car was just ridiculously loose. I mean, it was so obviously loose that I knew I had to make an adjustment. So I dropped the watts one notch, and that definitely helped it a ton. And you know, it was loose the whole first day because we ran first heat. I was like the 11th car out. The course was dirty, you know, and the car was a handful the first day. Second day, the track came to me, and the car was much, much better. It still had a few little problems I'm sorting out. Since I've gone to CP, I've changed a few things, which has totally changed the car. It's a totally different car. Doesn't look like it, but it is. It's a totally different car.
You better paint it some other color so we all believe it.
I like white. It's easy to keep clean. It can be dirty and you wouldn't know it.
Hey, John Ames said white paint's the lightest. There's less pigment in it.
There you go.
So yeah, no, thanks again for all the time. It's been great. It was fun.
Oh, no problem, man. Anytime, man.
Thanks for listening. For the show notes and contact information, please visit autocrosstalk.com. There you can also subscribe so that we can keep you up to date on new shows as they come out. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe on iTunes for the upcoming shows. You can connect to our Facebook page at facebook.com/autocrosstalk. You can share your thoughts, your insights, your questions, your suggestions there. Also share with your friends. Hopefully you found it entertaining and motivating, and hopefully other people will as well. It's been fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and check back next week for the next show.